you talk about in your book that we have this information overwhelm, and we get paralyzed by analysis. So can you kind of dive into that, this information overwhelm, which I think we all know that there's so much out there, and we can just spend our entire lives just digging through it all. But how do you get someone to really weed through that to get them to the spot? Like if they have 13 projects going on, like what are some steps that you do?
Well, the first thing is to figure out what the longer term goal is, or the vision. We have a tool, we call it the master vision, and it helps a client describe and define what they want their life to look like a decade from now. So that's, as you can imagine, that's hard. I mean, it's supposed to be hard. Yeah. You know, if I'm your track coach, I'm not going to help you at all if I have you run up 3 steps and come down again. But it's the demanding workouts that you feel exhausted after. So everything about today needs to be answered in light of where do you want to be down the road. And so if you're clear on the long term, and long term probably needs to be at least a decade. If you're clear on the long term, then it tends to reveal or expose what you should be doing in the short term. So there's a couple of ways that, sometimes you have too many projects and just intuitively, or too many action steps in a given day, and they all look like they're equally important. They're not, but determining which one is more important than the other requires a lot of mental energy. Yeah. So some people will either procrastinate, they'll kind of hit some resistance where it's kind of this invisible force that gives you all these rationalizations why you should do something else first. You should organize the office. You should
answer your
clean up
emails,
the database, charge your phone, return emails,
delete your junk calls. Delete your junk emails. That's what I do. I'm like, let me go delete like 50 emails.
But see, whenever you have that impulse to do it, it's kind of it's like that your unconscious is saying you're avoiding. So I've now, this is fairly recent, I've started to learn, whenever I face resistance, I know that I'm on the verge of a breakthrough, but the resistance is telling me to go the other direction, because the resistance, I don't believe is a God thing. The resistance is pushing us away from what's possible for us. Mm-hmm. So I like to use the phrase needle moving. So if you spend whatever you have to invest up front to figure out what are the few activities that really move the needle, that is time well spent, because it will guide you as to what to say yes to on when it comes to taking action. Sometimes when we're trying to figure out, what is the best resource here, or the best resource here, or should I follow this goal setting plan, this strategic plan? Should I follow this plan for communicating with my spouse? And people part of this is good. They just are a sponge, mm-hmm. but they don't ever follow a process long enough to get the fruit, because they get attracted to the next shiny object or the next enticing email that comes in with a enticing offer to try something and do our system, and they tell you why all the other people is wrong. And the fact is, there's a lot of great ideas and methods that work, but none of them work unless you work. Mm-hmm. So if you dabble with something for 2 weeks and then you switch to something else and then you switch to something else, either one of those probably could have made a positive difference for you. But because you stopped and started, it's like planting a garden or something and then digging up and having to restart. And so you're losing time, and we really don't have time to lose.
Yeah. No, I love that. So we kind of have this information overwhelm, and we just kind of have this execution problem, because we're just kind of like that shiny objects. It's like, oh, this sounds good. This is going to get my dopamine up a little bit. Let me reach out and do that one. And I love what you've done, because you've done kind of the same business for 30 plus years, which is awesome. And you don't hear a lot about that. So it sounds like is that your personality? Like you're very steady, and you teach people to like get focused, run the long-term race. Let's finish well. Is that like kind of your... I didn't have a lot of life before starting this business, which is weird. So
I was coaching before I was married. I was actually coaching couples before I was married. Not on how to have a great marriage, but just how to set goals as a couple.
Yeah.
And so I was steady from age 7 to age almost 21 on baseball. So maybe there is something to it. And we've reinvented the coaching practice, uh, 5, 6, 7 times in the last 30 years. But I think I'm more, Earl Nightingale used to say there's goal people and there's river people. And the river person, it appears at least from the outside that I'm more of a river person, and that I got in and then I'm flowing down the river to an end point. And then there's goal people who have a whole bunch of different and interesting goals that have nothing to do with each other that they've been pursuing. And there's nothing, one's not better than the other. They're just different. And so I've got a lot of clients that are goal people, and maybe I'm a river person, but I'll say I'm 55. I'll say that in the last 5, 7 years, I've tried to insert more random goals to just experience more of life. I didn't grow up doing outdoorsy stuff. So when I had kids and they got old enough to do cool things outside, I started them off doing it. And we were experiencing it together for the first time. And so what started as a silly little hike, half a mile up, half a mile down, ended up being, climbing Mount Rainier and Mount Shasta. And, years later, just kind of one step at a time, those things expanded.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think steady is good, but there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I've done this for long enough. What do I do next? But you have to come back to that vision. Where do you want to be a decade from now? If you go to bed tonight with your life pretty darn good. I mean, everybody that's listening, there's probably a few million people that are better off than all of us, but we're better off than 5, 6 billion.
Yeah, for sure.
We all ought to go to bed feeling pretty terrific, but then imagine that overnight our life transforms into the best life possible that it can be a decade from now. What would that look like? And so I ask a variation of that question often, because it gets the client, it gets the individual out of the way. They don't have to think about, how am I going to make that life happen a decade from now? So you'll be married 20 years a decade from now. How old will your kids be? What's going on in your financial life? How will your fitness be at that point? Your health? Where will you be geographically located? What kind of margin will you have in your life? All those things, if you design it now, you can make sure that every step moves you in that direction. But most people get hung up in going, well, they'll start to write something cool that really inspires them, and they'll think, I don't know how to do it. And they won't finish the thought, or they'll cross it off. So I use that kind of dream, it happens overnight exercise to get the person out of the way. So don't think about how you do it. There'll be a time for that. Just first figure out what, because that stops well-intentioned people more than anything else, is lack of clarity about who they want to become and what they want to achieve.